To which does this pronoun refer? To Yasmin or something else? Quite confusing, right? How about this one? Again, to which does this pronoun refer? To Carter or a woman? Well, in this video, we'll learn how to fix sentences like this by going deeper into the pronoun antecedent agreement. What is the pronoun antecedent agreement? Now, don't get this rule confused with the subject-verb agreement. That's a completely different rule of English grammar. The pronoun antecedent agreement is the rule of English grammar that says a pronoun must agree with its antecedent in number and gender. Meaning, if the antecedent is singular, the pronoun must also be singular, and plural if the antecedent is plural. If the antecedent is feminine, the pronoun must also be feminine. Masculine if the antecedent is masculine, and neutral if the antecedent is neutral. As in, if my sentence is this, the pronoun in the later part of the sentence must agree with the word it replaces, which is called the antecedent. So the antecedent is the one being replaced by the pronoun we use. So how do we know which pronoun to use? First, let's remember what a pronoun replaces. It replaces a noun. A noun is any word that names a person, thing, or place. For example, cat, bag, hat, Mark Zuckerberg, people, love, swimming, to live, and etc. It can even be a phrase, a noun clause, a gerund, a participle, or any part of speech that act as nouns. Pronouns are substitutes for nouns. Their primary function is to take the place of nouns when necessary. It can be as subjects, or objects of a sentence, or simply as replacements to show ownership. We'll talk more about this in a minute. We know that nouns and pronouns have the same functions in a sentence. We use pronouns to avoid redundancy or awkward sentences, like Mike brought Mike's puppy to school. Are we talking about one Mike here or two? If we're talking about the same Mike, then we sure are making an awkward sentence. So instead of repeating his name, we use the pronoun his to take his name in the later sentence. Mike brought his puppy to school. Those are pronouns. So we know what is an antecedent, a noun. But that's not always the case. You'll find that out later on. And we also know what is a pronoun, a substitute for a noun. We're basically saying that in pronoun antecedent agreement, pronouns must agree with the nouns they are replacing. Now look at this table. All of these are pronouns. Their use depends on their functions in a sentence. These pronouns are used if we replace a subject, the performer of the action word, or the manipulator of the sentence. These pronouns are used when we replace an object, the receiver of the action words, or the nouns being acted upon. And these pronouns are used to replace nouns that show ownership of something. That's just an overview of the functions of pronouns. Let's have examples, but further discussion about the functions of pronouns can be accessed through the links we provided in the description box below. So let's start with the first example. Karen bought the bag she liked. Karen acts as the performer of the action word, which makes her the subject of the sentence. The bag here is the direct object, directly receiving the action word performed by Karen. She liked here is an additional information to the bag, which makes this a noun clause, acting as a noun. They are acting as one to be the object of this sentence, the receiver of the action word. She here is the pronoun we use as a substitute for Karen to avoid redundancy, because if you don't replace it, it will be like this. Karen bought the bag Karen liked. It would have been fine if we are talking about a different person who liked the bag, like Karen bought the bag that Maddie liked, But since we're talking about the same person, Karen, we use the subjective pronoun she. And since Karen is a feminine name, and she is alone performing the action, which means that it is singular, we use the pronoun she. Another example, the students submitted their outputs in the morning. They attended their first subject afterward. Can you tell why this sentence uses they and their? Correct, because the antecedent is also plural. The gender won't matter anymore when our antecedent is plural. Now look at the following sentence. Sometimes, substitution does not happen in the same sentence because it can happen in the following sentence, up to the next sentence, or up until the whole paragraph. This time it just happens in the following sentence. Here we used they because we are using it as the substitute for the students to act the same as a subject, because it will be redundant if we keep using the same noun. The students submitted outputs in the morning. The students attended the first subject afterward. Sounds awkward, right? Next example, Kevin bought flowers for his wife. Kevin is alone acting as a subject. Therefore, our subject is singular. Since Kevin is a masculine name, we use the singular masculine possessive pronoun his, which shows ownership of his wife, instead of saying Kevin bought flowers for Kevin's wife, or Kevin bought flowers for another man's wife. Well, we do not want trouble. Kevin better buys flowers for his wife only. Shekina is loving the new book she bought, but it was expensive. This sentence can be made into two, but since it's using the coordinating conjunction but, it becomes one sentence only, a compound sentence. Let's divide it from but. We have Shekina is loving the new book she bought, and it was expensive. If we separate these two, they will still give complete thoughts. Each of them becomes a complete sentence. Shekina is the one who bought the book, so when we add the information to the object, we use a pronoun instead of repeating her name. Since Shekina is a feminine name and singular, we use the pronoun she. But is a coordinating conjunction that introduces a contrasting situation to the first clause. If the first clause is positive, the second clause must be negative, and vice versa. In this sentence, our first clause is positive. Shekina loved the book, but in the second clause, it says that it was expensive. Which is expensive? Surely that's not Shekina because we can't put enough value on a human being. The pronoun it is used to substitute a thing, place, or anything that is neutral, or simply genderless. Which noun could be neutral in this sentence? That is the book. So we're saying the book is expensive. Instead of Shekina is loving the new book she bought, but the book was expensive, we replace the book with it to avoid redundancy. There is nothing wrong with the grammar of this sentence, but when we talk about redundancy and accuracy, using pronouns would be our best option. Last example. Fried chicken is my favorite food. In fact, it is the best food in the world. These are two sentences. As I've mentioned earlier, substitution does not always happen in the same sentence. In the first sentence, no substitution happened, but surely there is in the second one. Look at this. Fried chicken is our subject. It is our antecedent of what pronoun? The pronoun it. Since fried chicken is neutral or genderless, we use the pronoun it. And it also acts as a subject in the second sentence. It was mentioned earlier that antecedents are mostly nouns, but that's not always the case, because antecedents can be pronouns too. Look at this. Most of these are indefinite pronouns, except for a few. They do not refer to anyone or anything specifically, and they are treated as singular. But when you see them in a sentence and need to substitute them, keep the following in mind. They are replaced by these singular pronouns. These pronouns for people, and these for anything neutral. These indefinite pronouns here can take both masculine and feminine pronouns. But if you, as a speaker or writer, know the gender of the person you refer to, you can use the pronoun based on that person's gender. But if you do not want to disclose even the gender of the person, just use either. For example, somebody submitted his output already. Somebody submitted her output already. If you know the person's gender, for example, masculine, and want to disclose his gender, you can use his for this sentence. If feminine, you can use her. But if you do not want to specify at all, just use either of the two. But most writers, if you notice, use the masculine pronouns he, him, and his to refer to both males and females for these antecedents. Some even use both and put or in between. However, this becomes problematic and redundant later on, especially when you need to do multiple replacements. For example, somebody submitted his or her output, and he or she got a perfect score. Well, this is not grammatically incorrect. It sounds redundant to read, all the more when you keep doing it in the following sentences. So it is better to use pronouns based on just one gender, masculine preferably. For example, somebody submitted his output and he got a perfect score. Sometimes following such rules can be tiresome, so if you notice, a lot of writers or speakers use plural pronouns instead of singular. For example, somebody submitted their output and they got a perfect score. But if you want to use plural pronouns and still follow rules, you can use nouns instead of pronouns as antecedents. For example, the students submitted their outputs and they got perfect scores. Now that is much better. Something, anything, and everything refer to anything except people, and they take the singular pronouns it and its. For example, something bit me. I feel it was a red ant. Its bite was painful and itchy at the same time. Anything is possible as long as you trust it unto God. Each, either, and neither takes singular pronouns too. They can refer to both people and things. When they refer to people, their gender is easier to identify compared to these, because they are mostly paired with nouns that tell you whether the person you refer to is female or male. For example, each of the girls is showcasing her talent well. Either of those two men lost his wallet. Neither of these boys wore his slippers. In these sentences, even if we use each, either, and neither, we still know what pronouns to replace them later on because of the nouns that follow them, which tell us of the gender they refer to. But this is not always the case. Sometimes the following nouns don't give a hint of gender. For example, each person deserves a significant other that respects him. Every person deserves a significant other that respects her. But as I have said earlier, if you do not know the gender, or if you do not want to disclose the gender of the person, instead of using him or her, you can use plural pronouns like them. But that would be informal, so it's better to use the universal pronoun he, his, or him. For this sentence, him. For things, you don't have to worry about gender. For example, every fruit has its group of vitamins. Each of these fruits has its group of vitamins. Either of the animals was raised by its owner. Neither of the animals was raised by its owner. For two antecedents joined by either or neither nor, the replacement pronoun must agree with the antecedent nearest to it. For example, either Jenna or her friends will bring their guests. Friends here is plural, and it is the closest to the replacement pronoun, their. The replacement pronoun then should agree to friends. Since it is plural, we use their. Either the attendees or Jenna will bring her guests. Jenna here is singular and closest to the replacement pronoun. Therefore, we base the replacement pronoun on Jenna to agree. Since Jenna is singular and feminine, we use the pronoun her. The same thing for neither nor. Two or more antecedents joined by and should be replaced by a plural pronoun. For example, Shakina and friends will bring their plus ones. The students and teacher will bring their own lunch. They also need to bring gifts. Shakina and Paul will bring their couple jackets.